Um, are we good to get started, you think? Or give it a minute? Okay, cool.
Let's get started.
Let's get started. So on behalf of Cindy and Zach, thank you everyone for joining the fourth installment, I believe, of our virtual user group meetings. We are glad to have you here. And we think we have a great presentation in store for you this evening. As Cindy alluded to, our agenda is, well, that's only going, hang on. Okay, I skipped past the agenda and I skipped past the slide that talked about Miravis, but I'm going to come back to it. So before we get started, a huge thank you as always to Kate and Miravis. We could not have gatherings like this where we have over 170 people register for this without the generosity of Miravis and their Zoom. So before we get too far into this, I just wanted to give Kate a chance to kind of talk to us a bit about Miravis and some of the opportunities that they have for us to give back.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. And hey, everybody. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. My name is Kate Perez. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Miravis. We are a nonprofit partner of Salesforce that trains veterans and military spouses and set them up for Salesforce careers. I'm very happy to host you guys. Really love that you guys are continuing this despite everything that is happening in the world. I know the FaceTime and the ability to socialize and network with each other is really important. So a little bit about Miravis. We are a 501c3 that trains veterans and military spouses for Salesforce careers through a 5-week, high-touch, very structured model. I think we have several people from the Austin area as well that are either coaches or graduates of the program. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat window. I'm happy to help out and answer those. In terms of how to give back, one thing that we are always looking for is coaches. So Salesforce professionals to take some of these newbies under their wing and help shepherd them into the Salesforce ecosystem, introduce them to your network, share with you the real world scenarios of what it's like, what life is like in the day of a Salesforce professional. We have a couple of events coming up as well. Miravis Mixer, we had our first one last, maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was fantastic. We had about 60 people come, and it's just a great chance for easy networking. You guys are more than welcome to join those. If you go to @MiravisVets on Twitter, you can get a quick snapshot of all of the events that we have coming up. And there's also, if you go to our website at miravis.org/volunteer, you can sign up to be a coach or a volunteer, lead office hours, be a resource in the community, be a mentor to all of the newbies that we have coming in to help feed the talent pipeline. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Chris, and thank you so much. Good to see you guys again this month.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. We certainly couldn't do this without you, so we appreciate it. Okay, a few announcements to get through before we get to our featured speaker. First, Summer 20 release is, I believe, going on now. I know my org is getting it this weekend. Global Gathering, August 11th. We're going to send out this deck, and you will have the link to sign up for the August 11th Global Gathering. I'd encourage you to do that. I would also encourage you to fill out the salary survey. So this is for the benefit of everyone. It's anonymous, and it is to help you better negotiate your salary the next time you are looking for your next Salesforce job. So a link here to fill that out, and it is going on through the end of this month. And we will review the results of that survey in the September meeting, probably. Speaking of the global gathering, that's happening in August. Because of that, we will not have an admin group meeting in August other than that. And later this month on the 28th is the dev group meeting. Encourage you to sign up for that as well. So With that, I'm going to pass it over to Zach, who is going to introduce our speaker this evening.
Yeah, so our speaker this evening is the wonderful Jennifer Lee. She's a lead solution designer at John Hancock. She, let me go ahead and switch and share my screen. Give me a moment, share. Oh, hey Chris, could you share? Zoom's gonna kick me out if I try and share the Jen Lee slide.
Yep, I can do that.
Gotta love Zoom problems. So yeah, go back one slide.
There you go.
There she is, Jen Lee. So Jen Lee's a lead solution designer at John Hancock. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts. She's a 5-time Salesforce MVP, a certified application architect. I believe she's 8 times certified. Good. She's a Salesforce blogger at jenwlee.com. She's an Automation Hour co-host. She is the community flow queen, and she has a cute little puppy there named Mochi. And we're really happy to have her present Work Smart, Not Hard, Build Modularized, I can't pronounce this, Componentize Flows with Jen Lee. Thank you, Jen.
Jen, I think you're muted.
All right, do folks see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Zach, for that intro. And... all right, so I think you've heard a lot of my intro slide. One thing to note is I do blog about Salesforce, so my website is jenwlee.com. So you'll find a lot of my blogs on Process Builder and Flow. I also do summaries of the upcoming releases. I'll talk about Automation Hour towards the end in case you haven't heard of us. And I love Trailhead. So I have, I'm a 10-time Ranger. That's a lot of badges. And I have the golden hoodie. So what we're going to talk about today is how to apply the dry software concept to declarative automation. And then we're going to review 4 use cases for modularized flows. And with that, we're going to work smart, not hard. So what is dry? So dry is the software development concept that stands for don't repeat yourself. So instead of building this humongo piece of code, what that concept is breaking it down into smaller manageable pieces of code. So breaking it into components or modules that you could build once and call and leverage multiple times. And therefore, because you've only built it once, you're maintaining that code once. And so the violations of a dry solution are wet solutions, which stand for write everything twice, we enjoy typing, waste everyone's time. So what we want to do is take that software concept and apply it to declarative automation. And what we're going to go through is we're going to talk through 4 different use cases, requirements. And we all know that there are so many different ways that you can build something in Salesforce. Sometimes there's a right way and sometimes there's a better way. So we'll talk through how it was built one way and how the design is more maintainable, easier to maintain, reuse, things like benefits like that, and what makes that a better design. So our first use case here is we have Addison Dogster, who is our admin developer, and Sally Sunshine is the operations manager. So Sally goes to Addison and says, I want to give these certain permissions to the finance department, and I want to give these other permissions to the sales division. So what Addison does is she creates two permission sets, an ABC permission set and assigns it to the finance department, and a DEF permission set and assigns it to the sales division. So she's like, easy peasy, done, right? But she's not really done because the user list is not static, right? We have people coming in and out, changing roles, leaving the company, new people joining. So in certain situations, especially highly regulated industries, like the one that I'm in, financial services, we might grant elevated rights to certain fields like personal identifying information. For a customer service rep, they might have access to SSN information. But if you're a sales rep, you wouldn't necessarily need access to SSN in order to do your job. So where we can, we want to use least privilege access. Just give your users enough permissions to do their job. Now, when Addison just assigned the users to these permission sets, we're requiring that managers or people remember to add people to permission sets, remove them accordingly when their roles or whatever situation change. Now, again, in those highly regulated industries, that could be a problem, right? Because if I was a CSR and I moved and my manager didn't remember that I shouldn't have access to an SSN, well, now guess what? As a sales rep, I have access to that information. That's more information than I need. So where we can, we want to have Salesforce do the remembering for us because we're human, right? And the more we have manual tasks, the likelihood of someone forgetting, right? So where we can, automate the processes, establish commonality or business rules that you could automate, and then use a process and a flow to add or remove users from the permission set. So as Sally leaves the finance department and joins the sales division, we're going to automatically remove that ABC permission set and add the DEF permission set. And as Justice joins the finance department, we're going to automatically add that ABC permission set. So there's no remembering to do these things. So here's how Addison's solution did. She created one process to add, remove the ABC permission set, a flow to add the ABC permission set, and another flow to remove the ABC permission set for the finance department. Then she did a clone and tweak, and she has a process to add or remove the DEF permission set, and another flow to add the DEF permission set, and another flow to remove the DEF permission set. Again, it's a clone and tweak for the sales division users. Now, again, as I mentioned before, there's so many different ways to do something in Salesforce. There's nothing really wrong with the way that she implemented it. And it's perfectly fine if she just had two permission sets in the org. But really, how many people only have two permission sets in their org, right? Over time, your org's going to grow and you're going to add another permission set with another set of users and another permission set with another set of users. And with each permission set, she's creating a process and two flows. And so as your org grows over time, and imagine if you have to make a change to it and you're then going back and touching all those components. So that becomes a maintenance nightmare. And this design is no longer sustainable. So what we want to do is be smart, and we're going to componentize. We're not going to create situations where we're cloning and tweaking and having similar, very similar processes and flows for these little tiny different use cases. Where we can, we're going to componentize your flow and genericize it so that you could reuse it over and over again. And what we want to do here is have Process Builder send over the necessary information into our componentized flow so that flow knows what it needs to do. And where we can, to follow the best practice of Apex triggers, we want to have one process per object. So here's the improved solution that Addison built. So now she has one process builder that handles adding and removing users from the permission set, whether it's the finance departments, the sales division, call center roles, and whatever other groupings of users who need permission sets. And she has one process, one flow to add and remove users from the permission set. So for all permission set adding and removing, she only has one process and one flow now for the whole entire org. So I'm just going to go through a couple of scenarios of how she set up the process. So the first scenario is a new finance user. And this is triggered off of the record is new and the users department is finance. Then as the immediate action, we're going to invoke the flow that she built, add, remove user from permission set. And we're going to send over 3 pieces of information. In the variable var user ID, we're going to send over the user ID. Var PB permission set action, we're going to send over the word add. And here we're going to tell Flow that I want to add a permission set. And lastly, we're going to send over in the variable var permission set name, we're going to send over a string API, the API name of the permission set. So that's ABC underscore permission underscore set. Now I'm going to have a little sidebar here. I do not hard code IDs in any of my processes or flows or any of my declarative configuration, just like it's a bad practice to hard code IDs in code. And the reason why I don't hard code IDs and I use references like an API name, which is less likely to change, is because if you're referencing a component, here a permission set, and let's say that permission set doesn't exist in production, and I created it net new in a sandbox. Well, guess what? When you create that permission set in all your sandboxes leading up to production, including production, that Salesforce ID will never be the same, right? So if you hard coded it and you moved you moved your flow or your process up into your next sandbox and all the way up to production, then you're going to need to go into your process or your flow, create a new version, and then change the hard-coded ID to match the ID of that permission set in whatever sandbox or production. The only way that that ID will ever be the same in all your sandboxes and production is if you take that component and do a refresh, or you create the sandbox from production. So hence, where you can, reference the developer name, the API name, rather than using hard-coded IDs. All right, our next situation is an existing user who was a previously part of the finance department. So my criteria here is the user is active and the prior value of the user's department is finance and the user's department is changed. Again, as immediate action, I'm invoking the same flow and passing over information in those 3 variables. So I'm still passing over the user ID. But this time in the var PB permission set action, I'm passing over the word remove. And I'm telling my flow that I want to remove the permission set. And then for the var PB permission set name, I'm still interacting with that same permission set, but this time I'm removing the ABC underscore permission underscore set. So let me explain the relationship with a user and a permission set. So we have the user object that contains everything about the user. Then we have a permission set object that holds all your custom permission sets with their associated permissions. And then we have a junction object called permission set assignment that basically says, here's the user and here's the permission set that they're assigned to. So the assignee ID is the user's ID, and then the permission set ID is the ID from the permission set object. All right. One thing to note, when you work in Flow, you're working with a complete blank canvas, and you don't really have boundaries that you would have normally in Salesforce setup. So if you're familiar with the way that you assign permission sets to a user and remove permission sets, Salesforce gives you boundaries. So there is one column that has all the available permission sets in your org. Then there's another column that where you have the assignments of the permission sets to that user. So you could only take a permission set from one column and then move it to the next or move it back. So you could only assign a permission set if the user doesn't already have that permission set. And you could only remove that permission set if that user already has it assigned. Now in Flow, Flow doesn't have those boundaries. So therefore, when you build your flow around adding and removing permission sets, you have to first check that the user doesn't already have that permission set before you assign it. Because if you don't, and you try to assign a duplicate permission set, you'll get a flow error. And also, when you're trying to remove a permission set, you need to check that the user has that permission set before you try and remove it. Because then if you don't, it'll say you'll get a flow fault error that it couldn't find the record. So things to consider that you don't normally do when you're just doing configuration through setup, but you do need to consider when you're building flow. All right, so let's take a look at this consolidated flow. All right. Okay. People see Salesforce, right? Just want to make sure.
Actually, we're still seeing your slide deck. Excuse me.
Okay. All right, now do we see Salesforce?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so in this flow, what we're doing here is we're looking at the permission set object and taking a look at the name of the API name of the permission set. And we're stopping at the first permission set found that meets that criteria. And then here we're storing the ID. So taking the API name and then getting the ID rather than hard coding the ID. Right here, the next step, I just want to make sure that I found the ID in order to move forward. Because if it didn't find the ID, I can't do anything with it. So here it's just the variable is now false, two negatives equal a positive. So once it found the ID, we're now going to take a look at that junction object, permission set assignment. And we're basically looking to see if the user already is assigned to that permission set. So the assignee ID equals the user ID passed from process builder and the permission set ID that we just looked up. And we're going to stop at the first record found. And if we did find something, we're going to take the assignee ID and store it in a variable. But if we didn't, we're going to assign null. So now we have a decision because we're either going to assign a permission set or remove a permission set. And remember how I talked about setting those boundaries. So what we're going to do here is in the path of adding a permission set, we want to make sure that the user doesn't already have that permission set. So here we're doing a check on the variable user has permission set is null true. They don't have the permission set. And that var pb permission set action is add. We're looking to add the permission set. And then another path is removing the permission set, but making sure that the user already has that permission set. So here we're looking at that variable var user has permission set is null false. They have, so two negatives equal positive, so they have that permission set. And then the var pb permission set action equals remove, so we're removing it. So here, if we're adding the permission set, we're working with that junction object, permission set assignment, and then taking assignee ID, the user ID, and the permission set ID, and then creating the record there. And then if we're removing the permission set, we're doing the opposite. Instead of creating the record, we're now deleting the record from the permission set assignment, and then it has the same filter conditions. So that's that first solution. And am I showing back the slide deck?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so our next requirement is that they want an easy way to assign users to a selected number of permission sets. So here, because Addison created something very similar that we just walked through, she's like, okay, well, I could just throw a screen in front of that to allow the person to select a user and then select whichever permission set. And then basically the steps are pretty much the same, but I don't have the remove path. So I'm just going to delete this because it's not really needed. Now again, I talked about there's multiple ways that you can build something in Salesforce. So rather than clone and tweak, what would be a better design is bring in that original flow that we just walked through as a subflow. And so we're basically leveraging what we already built and walked through, right? We're leveraging that and reusing it in another situation that's very similar. So what we end up doing is if we ever needed to change that original flow, we're changing it back in the flow that I just walked through. And then it just inherits it because it's a subflow. It just inherits all the changes naturally. So I'm not making the changes twice, I'm only making it once. So here we have the screen that allows you to select a user, and then there's 3 permission sets. And then once you select a user and then select the permission set, then it'll just add the permission set that you selected to that user. All right. So let's go back here. And okay. So this is the clone and tweak. So Addison added the screen, and then she deleted the remove permission set step. But this is the better design. So here we have the screen, and I'll just quickly show you what I did here. So this is the lookup component, and I'm just calling the user lookup from the created by ID field on the account. And then for permission sets, I have 3 permission sets that I set up as a choice. And they're pointing to the API names of the permission sets. Now for Subflow, all I did was I brought in that whole permission set into my flow. And what you do with Subflows is then you could set up, these are all the input variables in that other flow. And if you want to include variables, then you just toggle over and provide that information. So in this case, I'm sending the word add in the var pb permission set because we're adding a permission set. And in the var permission set name, remember that's the API name of the permission set, I'm sending over whatever the user selected as that permission set in one of the 3 radio buttons. And then the var user ID, I'm sending over the user that was selected in that user lookup on the screen. So it's pretty easy to set up a subflow. So you just drag over subflow, and then you just start typing the name of the flow. And then you just give it a name, API name, and then you just configure whatever you want to pass over to that flow. And then you just connect it. So pretty easy. Then by connecting subflows, you're just maintaining it once and not multiple times. So really decreasing your maintenance costs down the road.
Hey, Jen, I had a question. for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with the screen component that you have right now, I know it's radio buttons. What about the instance where you may need to assign more than one permission set at a time or a permission set group?
So permission set groups behaves very similarly to permission sets in terms of permission set assignments. Multiple permission sets, you'll probably need to go through and do like a multi-select and then do a looping that does the assignment. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, back to the deck. All right, so our next use case is the record owner is usually the task owner, and the record owner leaves the company. No one updates the record ownership, and then we have a process that runs that creates a scheduled task that assigns to the record owner. And as a result, because the record owner is inactive, the task now fails because it can't assign to an inactive user. Or we have a situation where we have task assignment information that needs to be updated, and it's, in quotes, hard-coded in a process or flow. And now you need to go and clone or create a new version of the process or flow to update the task information. That goes to, I don't like hard coding things. All right, so one way around it to avoid hard coding things is that you could use custom metadata type. And the cool thing about custom metadata type is if you've created custom objects, you could create a custom metadata type, and they're so awesome. They allow you to change things and not have to hard code them in your code, in your configuration. But what's the difference between a custom object and a CMDT? So as you know, custom object stores your business and customer information. So that could be your sales, your donation, applications. The records are data, so you can't deploy them. You have to use data loader or something equivalent. You can't deploy them via chain sets or metadata API. They're accessed via a tab, and it's the users who interact with the custom object records, and it ends with __C. Custom metadata type, on the other hand, stores application and org information, so that could be your instructional text, your IDs, your mappings, things like that. The cool thing about custom metadata type is the records are metadata, which means it's deployable. So you can deploy them with chain sets, metadata API, Capado, whatever tool you're using to do your deployments. And when you do a sandbox creation or refresh, your custom metadata automatically comes down. And it's accessed via setup only. And it's your application and org that interacts with the custom metadata type records. And it ends with __MDT. When would you use a CMDT? Well, when you want to reference your application or org information in multiple components in the org, and you're maintaining it once, but you're referencing it multiple ways. So you could reference it with a validation rule, a flow, a process code. Or you need to manage some type of mapping, like a state to tax rate mapping, or manage information that's subject to change, but you don't want to hard code it into things that you then have to do a deployment to make changes to. Or you want to store application information that is of a similar structure, like chatter messages or task information. You can even store information that is different from for your different environments. So we have a lot of custom metadata types in our org that has information just for our dev sandbox, our SIT, our UAT, our prod, so that we don't have to keep changing the information in the different environments. All right, so here is the creation of the task information, and we're handling with custom metadata type and checking to see that the owner is active or not before assigning the user to the task. And here I'm showing that I'm invoking that same flow for multiple processes. So let me go over to Salesforce. So here's a custom metadata type setup. I'm calling it task information. And as you see, it looks pretty similar to a custom object or a standard object. You have the ability to create custom fields. They don't have nearly all the different data types that you have in a custom object, but it's pretty good. You could also create validation rules and set up your page layouts. And then for the records that are associated with the task information, you click on this button here, manage whatever the CMDT record is. And here are all the records that, again, are deployable. So here I have for my task assignment, I set up for my contact object, the subject, the status, the due date, the name of the unassigned user. So if any of that information ever needs to change, I'm just going into my custom metadata type and changing it, and I'm not touching my flow or process or wherever it is referenced. All right, so let's go over to this flow. So let me actually start over at the process. So here's one process that invokes that flow. So it runs off the contact. And the criteria here is the record is new or the contact level is changed and the pick list for the contact level is primary. Then we're invoking the flow, the task assignment flow. And I'm passing over two variables. There's a variable CMDT task assignment. Again, I'm passing over the API name. So if I go back here, it's the API name of my task assignment. Let's go back to, and then for the record owner, I'm passing over the contact owner ID. So back over to flow, which is what is invoked from the process builder. On the user object, I'm looking up the ID that's equal to the record owner that was passed from process builder. And I'm stopping at the first record found. And then I'm taking the is active field and I'm storing it in a variable. Then I'm checking to see if it has a CMDT or not. So again, that's the CMDT information that was passed from the process. So here it has a CMDT is now false, two negatives equal positive, or it doesn't have a CMDT record associated with. If it has a CMDT record, then I'm going to go into that custom metadata type task assignment and go and basically pull the information on the subject status, due date, and name of unassigned user. If it doesn't, it's just going to bypass that step. And then next, we're just going to check that the user is still active, right? Because we don't want to assign a task to an inactive user because then that will just bust up our process. So here we're looking at active, so var record owner active status equals true, and inactive is just equals false. So if they're inactive, we're basically going to take the user who was in that unassigned. So if I go back to the custom metadata type, there's an unassigned user. And if it had a custom metadata type, I would pull that name into my flow to do the task assignment. And if it's active, then we're just going to go and do the task assignment where we're setting activity date, owner. This is based off of whether we have an unassigned owner or if the user is active, we're going to actually assign that active owner. And then status and subject. So that's the flow there. Any questions so far? All right. Our Next use case is we want to automate a process of assigning a user story to me and then changing that status to in progress with one button click. So this is a pretty simple flow. All it is updating the record and changing the user story reviewer and the status field. So our next enhancement is for that same use case, right? There are sometimes where multiple reviewers need to review that user story. And currently, I only have the one user story reviewer field. So there's no way to identify those multiple reviewers. And a user story reviewer may review that same user story multiple times, but we only want to track them once. So what Addison ended up doing was she created a child table that stores the user story reviewers. So whether it's the original reviewer or the multiple reviewers. But because of the requirement that we only want to track the reviewer once, she wants to check to see if that user story reviewer already exists. And if they don't exist, then we're going to create that user story reviewer record. So that's setting the primary user story reviewer. Now, the same process, other than updating the user story to the status in the primary user story reviewer, any additional reviewers has the same 3 steps that we just walked through from the previous one. So again, this was another one of those created and then tweaked and cloned situations. So here we have the same 3 steps into flows. So we created duplication. So now we're maintaining 2 versions of the same thing. So if we ever needed to make changes to that user story child reviewer, we'd need to make it twice. So that's double the work. So again, a better design would be to go back to the original and just bring in the subflow, right? Keep that flow that had the 3 steps to its own flow, but then just bring it in as a subflow into this original flow. So you're not duplicating the maintenance of it. And if you ever needed to make a change to it, you're making a change to that original flow that had those 3 steps. Okay. Oops. It's like hidden behind the sharing. Okay. So here's my user story screen. So essentially, my automation would be to change the user story reviewer and then change this to review in progress. So instead of me having to do those clicks, I want to do it in one button. So here is my flow, update records. It's the user story object with ID equals the record ID that I'm passing in a quick action. And then I'm changing the status to review in progress. And I'm changing the user story reviewer to the current running user of the flow. So here you can always bring in the current running user by using this global variable $user and then using the user's ID. So this was the revised step that had the 3 steps. And then this was the other flow that had those 3 steps here. And lastly, this was the better design in bringing over that subflow, create user record reviewer, which was this flow here. Okay, here. All right, our last use case. So when a flow faults, I want to send an email to the production support team to let them know. So I'm going to confess that I built something that was poorly designed. first, this was before they had the ability for automation to have the notification set to Apex exception recipients. And when a flow or process builder faulted, the only person who got the notification was the person who either created the process or flow or the last person who maintained it. Now, people leave, so if the person left, no one is getting those emails. So I thought, what I could do was for every single flow in my org, I'm just going to add 2 steps. I'm going to have them look up the email address in a custom metadata type, because if we ever needed to add more people, I'm adding it to custom metadata type. I'm not touching each flow. So that was a good design. And send an email. But I had people add these 2 exact same steps to every single flow in our orgs. We have 8 production orgs. So can you imagine, right? I'm having them add to this other flow, but if I ever needed to maintain it, it's going to be a nightmare because I need to go into every single flow in my org to make a change. Calgon, take me away. So, and this was before I even knew about subflows. So I thought I was like all cool and everything by adding these new fields and these 2 steps in. But my coworker, Michael Stevenson, said, Jen, do you know about this thing called Subflow? I'm like, what are you talking about? So he's like, just put those 2 steps in a flow and then use them as subflows. And that was genius, right? So now in every flow in our org, we have that subflow. So if I need to maintain it, again, I'm maintaining it once and not multiple times. Right, so here are my 2 steps that I added to every single flow. And to correct this, we created this as its own flow. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete these 2 steps because I don't need them anymore. Instead, I'm going to bring in the subflow. And we're passing over the name of the flow. I'm just going to put flow name and the fault message. And this is looking at the global variable for flow and fault message. Now, you notice that I had had fault connectors created. So the first line that you draw in your flow is a regular connector. So that's like the happy path. But there is a fault connector, and that's the second line that you draw in your flow. And this I use for any DML action, database action that I have. So it's either with a create, update, get, or delete records. So if anything happens to that, I want to get that email, right? So one of the things is, you notice that this does not have a connector. So how am I going to get the fault connector, which is the automatic second one? So the only way that I know to work around this is to draw that first line and then the second line, which is the fault connector, which is what you want, and then just delete the first one. Great, so that's how you set up fault connectors. Great. Okay, so to recap, we've learned how to apply the dry software development concept to declarative automation. We're going to work smart and not hard. We're not going to create separate similar flows and have multiple versions of very similar things in our orgs. Where we can, we're going to build modularized, componentized flows for reuse. And I do want to point out that it does take more work to think more generically and build it for the whole reuse. But you will reap the benefits down the road because the amount of time you spent up front to make it something reusable, the less time you're going to spend maintaining it going forward. So I really think it's worth the effort to put that, to build that. So by building componentized flows, you're building it, you're maintaining it once, you're having processes and flows send over the information into the componentized flow so it knows what to do. And then where you can have one process per object. Now, Automation Hour, so I mentioned that. So if you haven't heard about Automation Hour, it's a free online webinar series. We try and meet every other Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. I have two awesome co-hosts. They're fellow MVPs. Rakesh Gupta is known as the Automation Champion, and David Litton. And we're very passionate about automation. So we have guest presenters present business use cases and process automation solutions. So we have, as you can see, our lineup for the rest of the year. We have MVPs, we have people in the community who you've seen in the Trailblazer community or on the Slack channel, helping people out with process changes. And I want to call out October 23rd, we have Rakesh coming back to present. So if you haven't heard of us and you want to attend, you don't even have to attend it live, just register and you'll get the link to it after the fact. But go to automationhour.com and you can have access to register for our upcoming sessions and our links to all our 90+ episodes that we post on our YouTube channel as well. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. So stay healthy, calm, keep your distance. And any questions?
Hi, thanks, Jen. This is Pat McClellan.
Hi.
I'd love to see the subflow that you had for fault handling.
Sure. Let's go back here. All right, so I have a custom metadata type object called fault email addresses. And it's very simple in terms of the custom metadata type. I have an email address, which is, you can have multiple separated by a comma. And I have this org region name. And so for because we have so many different sandboxes, when you get this email, you want to kind of know which sandbox, so you're not guessing. So we have our org region, each of our sandbox name, I'll just populate that field with UAT or QA or whatever it is. And then I have just basic send email. I have a template, which I'll just show in a little bit. So I basically have in my subject, whatever my sandbox name is, and then error on flow execution, and then I have my flow name. And then I'm sending it with the email addresses. And so in my email body, I'm just saying, here's the sandbox that the flow error happened in. Here's the flow. Here's the time, and then this would be whatever message caused the flow. So it could be like duplicate record, or couldn't find record, or couldn't update, or didn't have the sufficient permissions. Whatever shows up in that horrible red message when your flow falls on the screen. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, in Trailhead and a lot of places, they don't talk much about the fault connector that you can use. And I've never seen it documented well. Could you talk about that a little bit, and which elements you can use the fault on? So
I typically use it if I'm using any of the database actions. So the create, update, get, and delete.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What's your opinion on invocable process builders versus using a process builder to invoke a flow?
I use them for different scenarios. I go by that whole one process per object, but I don't want to overload my one process with so many criteria nodes. So where I can, I will use an invocable process to then do a second level of the if-then statement. So for example, on my case object, I might have this massive process that has so many criteria nodes, but I know that I have something that will run off of changes to a status. That's when I'll have one criteria node that says status is changed, right? And then I will invoke another process to then go through and say, okay, if the status is this, then do these other things. So I'm not having all those conditions in my master process. I'll invoke a flow in a process when I need to do more complex things that a process can't handle. My preference is to use flow where I can, because sometimes I think process builder, especially in situations if you use a lot of the scheduled actions, it doesn't reevaluate, and the record changes and you end up still sending whatever the scheduled action is. And we've seen that happen a couple of times in our orgs. And Salesforce themselves had recommended not using scheduled actions, but invoking a flow that then checks the criteria again to make sure it's met, and then doing the scheduled actions in a flow. Any other questions?
This is Pat again. If nobody else has got a question, I'm curious what new features of Flow Builder you're looking forward to.
I am keeping an eye on the after record save flow. That's a new enhancement to summer 20. That is the first move over to replacing Process Builder. Because I just like doing everything in Flow versus having to do Process Builder that then invokes a flow. But it's just not there yet. So it can't recognize changes to fields. And I don't want my process to invoke every time the record is updated, and not just looking at specific field changes, for example. So I'm really excited about where Flow is going. They've put a lot of investment in Flow. Flow is the engine that's running on a lot of the other clouds that they're building. So they're continuing to, enhance that. So it's really cool what they're doing. And I like the enhancements that they're making to improve Flow and make it more usable for people who are learning Flow. Because if you looked a couple of releases back, right, when we had Cloudflow Designer and that hideous UI and trying to figure things out, and it's really gone a long way in terms of now you don't need to create a lot of variables. Salesforce creates them for you. Like with Summer, they're now creating the loop variable. You don't have to create that anymore. They're putting guardrails on best practices. So if you create a loop and you didn't close it, they're going to show a tip that says, hey, you didn't close it. Or if you did a database action inside a loop, which is bad practice, they'll show a tip that says, hey, you just did a database action in a loop. So you want to fix that.
And Nadina, I think I saw your hand was up. Maybe it was a mistake. maybe it was a little blip.
Hey Jen, this is Pradeep Junalagada.
Hi.
I'm just curious, hi. I'm just curious about your experience on debugging flows, like say you have a complex flow and you expect if the flow for a given use case to take a particular route and it doesn't go that way. How do you debug it? What is your general experience like in that department?
So I use this button heavily, this debug button. That's one of the best things that they built, because looking at debug logs to figure out what's going on is hideous. So have you used this debug feature?
My experience with flows has been rather rudimentary, so hence my ask. So
Yeah, so let's see. So I'm going to click. All right. So in debug, and you should, so if you're building flows, I definitely recommend using debug to unit test your flow, so that you don't end up having so many different versions of your flow before you activate it. When you go into debug, all your input variables are available for you to provide information into. So let's say I wanted to add and the user's ID. Okay, I can't see. All right, so here I'm just simulating that I'm sending information into this flow from a process builder. Oh, this is the screen flow. Interesting. Okay. So here, if you have a screen flow, I didn't realize I picked the one with the screen flow. It will show you whatever screen you configured. And I didn't have a next button here. So let me go to this one and do debug. Okay. So essentially what debug does is it runs through your whole entire flow for you. So each of these boxes is a flow component. So this one says get records, do a lookup on permission set ID. So if I go back to my flow, it's executing this box here. So it tells you name equals, that's what I had configured for my get records, and the value that I'm passing is that ABC permission set, and it successfully found the record, and here's the ID that it stored in that permission set ID. And then the next step is another box. So this is the decision that basically says your variable, so I have an ID, is now false. So that means it had the outcome of permission set ID found. So if you go back here, now it's evaluating this step. So here's where debug is really very valuable, because it tells you what you set up, and then here's the value that went into this variable. So if you're expecting a value and this shows up null, right, then you did something wrong with your flow. Or if you're expecting that it finds a value or update and it didn't, then that's where you can go and troubleshoot, and you know exactly which box, flow element you need to go and look at.
Hey, Jen, this
Yeah.
is Pat again. 3 quick things about debug. I use debug a lot and love it. Number one is that unlike Apex unit tests, when you run debug as a test, it actually makes changes to the database.
Yes, yes.
So
Please
don't be surprised.
never, ever use debug in production. They did release with summer with auto launch flows. There is now a checkbox on the debug screen that has this rollback functionality, but it only rolls back if you do a create, update, delete record. Some of the other actions will still continue to happen. So definitely when you debug in a full copy sandbox or some other sandbox, but not ever in production. Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, the second thing I was going to do, and you'll probably hate this because it kind of goes against that, is that because of that, one of my clients who is pretty flow savvy needed to do, basically I created a macro for them. I created a flow that they never actually activate, but they can go in and they can run it in debug on a set of records and do it. So it's like a little macro maker in debug. And then the third point, and by the way, that one used invocable Apex. So they actually are running batch things when they need to. The third thing about debug is you showed putting in the input parameters. You can't input an actual record. You can only input a record ID. So that means that if you're going to be debugging on this, it's a good idea. For example, if you call a flow from a process, you've got a choice. You can either pass the record that started that process, the whole record, or you can just pass the record ID. Now, it seems like it would make sense. Why not just go ahead and pass the whole record? That way you don't have to get the record in the flow. The problem with that is you can't debug it then. You can't use the debug because you can't pass in a whole record to it. So I now make my flows assuming that I'm only going to get the record ID, and then I go and I get the record. And that way I can debug it because you can supply it a record ID.
That's a great point. I see, Maria, you have your hand up. Do you have a
Thanks
question?
for sharing.
Hey, yeah, I had a quick question just with, you'd mentioned it early at the beginning, but about instances where we might still want to go with a process builder to trigger a flow for an after update rather than going straight from it. I was curious if you could recap, like high level, what are the use cases that we could consider using the after flow immediately versus still using process builder?
So I did a blog post on this, and my scenario was very, very limited. If you have a process that you want to run every single time, regardless of whether the field actually changes, then go for doing it in flow. But I couldn't really find true real life situations where I would recommend using that in my orgs today.
Awesome, thanks.
Pat, I just wanted to point out something here really quickly. This is courtesy of Vince Carr, who is on the call. In summer 20, and he put the link in the chat so you can check it out, but in summer 20, it does look like you can pass in a record.
Excellent. Excellent. So no more unnecessary going and retrieving the record that you already had.
Right.
Great. I think that wraps up Q&A, and we're gonna pass it on over to Cindy for the certification voucher giveaway. Cindy, are you there? She's on mute.
Yes, I'm here. mute button is in different spots when it comes to different mediums. I was looking at the top because I'm used to blue jeans. But thank you all for joining today. And also thanks to everyone who promoted this session on LinkedIn and Twitter. It's always good to get visibility to this user group. I was telling a friend earlier today how amazing the Austin user group is. And it's amazing for so many reasons. One, our community is active and strong and professional. But two, we are connected to so many groups across the nation, across our state, and around the world. And I do sincerely appreciate everybody that promotes our meetings. We get a lot of visibility because of that. And it's just really nice to see, especially in times like these when we join these groups and it's nice to see different faces. I see so many faces on the screen right now, and it's really, really, really beautiful. But we are limited to 2 giveaways. 1, as a result of promoting on Twitter, and 2, for promoting on LinkedIn. And so tonight we have 2 winners for our giveaway. The first is Chelsea Kung. Thank you, Chelsea. Yes, a round of applause. I see a lot of people clapping. Thank you for being part of the community. You're a really big contributor to the community, and thanks for participating tonight and also promoting our event tonight. And then secondly, Melissa Shook, who I personally know and adore, and thank you, Melissa, for being part of the community tonight. So make sure that you both share your email addresses with Zach, Chris, and me so that we can make sure that we get these vouchers to you. This is a big deal. It promotes your learning and growth in Salesforce. And also, again, thank you for your participation. And I will lastly say thank you a million times over to Kate Perez and the Maravis Foundation. Oh my gosh. Every meeting, I just am more indebted to you guys for your support to our community. Thank you. Thank you.
Cindy, do you think there's any chance you could take the screenshot?
I would love to, but I completely tried to do some computer science-ish work to my Mac, and I messed up the ability to take screenshots.
My computer's working again now. It's been fighting me all day for some reason. But if I could have everyone come on camera, or as many people as possible, and I'll try to take a couple of screenshots. We'll have everyone smile and look all pretty. Let's see. And everyone smile for a few seconds. It's gonna seem like a while I figure out how to screenshot. So there's one screenshot, and then keep smiling for me, keep smiling. And I got 2 screenshots, awesome, and I got multiple screens that time. So thank you, everyone. We ended a bit early, which is rare, but that's totally okay. So if folks want to stick around and just chat with us, that's totally fine. If you want to continue your evening, that is also fine too. We'll understand. Chris, Cindy, do you have anything to say?
No, except huge thank you to Jen Lee for taking the time to do this. I mean, it was amazing. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Well, while we have everyone, make sure you RSVP for the global gathering. Our global gathering is next month. And Melissa or Lindsay, do you want to talk more about that?
Or Nadina?
Oh, I didn't even see you, Nadina.
I know, it's like, where's Nadina?
Lindsay or Melissa, if y'all want to talk, that's fine.
I mean, it's going to be awesome. We're going to have Kevin Poorman. So that's very exciting, and giveaways and such. So RSVP and come along. Join the fun. Nadina, anything to add? I feel like she's our champion.
No, nothing more to add. Just know there will be a lot of giveaways. We have tons of certifications to give away, and we have to give them all away that night. So you're definitely, there's a definite possibility that everyone can be a winner.
There's a lot of certification vouchers for sure.
Yeah.
And
yeah, take advantage of this time. I mean, I would just say
Come on, Paul.
overall, be a proponent of the
I
time
don't even know what you said to me.
to take certifications, build your skill set, attend user groups that you normally wouldn't attend. This opportunity allows us for a lot of growth, and I think the growth is there if you want it. Thanks, Jen, for presenting tonight. I mean, you offered so many tips and tricks and learnings for the group, and this is what you can expect in any of our groups around town. So yeah, if you have a free evening or a free night during this very odd time, like just take advantage of it. It's there, and maximize it for what it is would be my advice. So thanks to everyone for attending tonight.
yeah, thanks everyone. And if you're still